God said, relax, trust, and let God work in silence. Sometimes the loudest seasons in your life are the ones where heaven says nothing. You pray, but there's no echo. You cry, and there's no immediate response. You stand in faith, and yet everything around you looks motionless. And in that silence, God whispers, not in thunder, not in fire, but in stillness, relax. Trust me, I'm working behind the scenes. When God seems silent, it's easy to assume he's absent, distant, or uninterested. Our human nature is conditioned to believe that activity equals progress and that silence means nothing is happening. But in the kingdom of God, silence often means strategy. The seasons when heaven appears quiet are the very seasons when God is crafting his most powerful moves behind the scenes. He works in ways that eyes cannot see and hearts can barely perceive. While you're wondering if he's forgotten you, he's actually setting things in motion that could not happen if he spoke too soon. His silence is not neglect, it's precision. God speaks to prepare you, but he remains silent to position you. In those quiet spaces, he is not ignoring your prayers, he is strengthening your faith. When you can't hear him, he's listening more closely than ever. The silence tests your trust. It reveals what you truly believe about his character. Anyone can believe when the sky is bright and the voice of God feels near. But it takes deep, mature faith to believe when heaven feels still. That's where real trust is born, not in the moments of clarity, but in the moments of confusion when you choose to believe anyway. God's silence becomes the soil where unshakable confidence grows. Think about how a seed works. Once planted, it disappears beneath the soil. It looks buried, forgotten, lifeless. But in that darkness, something holy is happening. The seed is breaking open. Roots are stretching downward, and life is forming unseen. The silence of that soil is not death. It's preparation for growth. In the same way, God's silence in your life does not mean he has buried you to forget you. It means he has planted you to grow you. And when the season is right, what he has been developing in private will break through in power. When God is silent, he's often protecting something sacred. If he revealed his plan too soon, the enemy would try to destroy it, or you might try to rush it. His silence becomes a shield. It guards his purposes from premature exposure. That's why Jesus often performed miracles and then told people not to speak about them yet. There's a divine rhythm to revelation. God's timing is perfect, and his silence ensures that his plan unfolds in the fullness of time, not in the rush of your impatience. The pause is purposeful. Heaven doesn't operate on human clocks. It moves by divine coordination. During these seasons, your role is not to figure everything out, but to remain still and trust the process. The absence of sound is an invitation to stillness. When you stop demanding explanations and start embracing his peace, you begin to recognize his presence in new ways. The silence becomes sacred space where faith listens instead of talks, where worship deepens without words. It's there in the quiet that your spiritual ears tune to frequencies you could never hear in the noise of constant answers. Sometimes God's silence is his way of reminding you that your relationship with him is not built on performance or proof, but on presence. He doesn't want you addicted to his voice. He wants you anchored in his nature. When you truly know who he is, you don't panic when you can't hear him. You rest knowing he's still near, still faithful, still working. The silence becomes the sound of trust. It shifts you from needing reassurance to walking in confidence. In the Bible, God often worked in silence before major breakthroughs. Between the Old and New Testaments, there were 400 years when heaven didn't speak through prophets. But in that silence, he was setting the stage for the coming of Christ. While people thought God had gone quiet, he was actually orchestrating the most powerful redemption story in history. The silence was not absence. It was the sound of divine strategy unfolding. When you grasp that truth, you stop fearing the quiet. You begin to see silence as a signal that God is moving with purpose. You realize that hidden doesn't mean forgotten, and delayed doesn't mean denied. His silence is the sacred space between promise and fulfillment where he builds you for what's coming. Every unanswered prayer, every still night, every quiet moment carries the weight of unseen glory being formed. The silence of heaven is not empty. It's pregnant with divine intent. Faith doesn't flourish in chaos. It matures in stillness. When life slows down, when the noise fades and the familiar voices are quiet, That's when faith begins to take root in ways it never could when everything was loud and certain. Stillness exposes what you truly believe about God. It removes the distractions that make you depend on signs and feelings and forces you to rely solely on trust. When God invites you into stillness, He's not punishing you with silence. He's purifying your faith. It's in that quiet space where your spirit learns the difference between believing in what you see and believing in who He is. Faith doesn't need constant confirmation to stay alive. It thrives when nothing makes sense, when every outward sign contradicts the promise, and yet you still choose to believe. The stillness becomes a sacred classroom where you learn that faith is not built on motion, but on surrender. The absence of noise doesn't mean the absence of God. It means He's teaching you to listen to His heartbeat instead of your circumstances. In stillness, the soul becomes sensitive to divine whispers that would otherwise be drowned out by worry, fear, or striving. Faith begins to speak louder than facts when your heart finally quiets enough to hear it. Stillness is uncomfortable because it removes control. It demands that you stop fixing, planning, and pushing. But in that discomfort, faith starts to mature. You learn to stop measuring progress by what you can see and start measuring it by the peace that rests inside you. The world tells you to hustle your way into breakthrough, but God often tells you to be still and know that He is God. That stillness doesn't mean inactivity. It means inner calm in the middle of uncertainty. It's the confidence that while you rest, heaven works. When you stop striving, you give God permission to do what only He can do. Faith grows in stillness because that's where you confront your doubts. When everything slows down, there's nowhere to hide from the questions, fears, and insecurities that usually get buried under business. But instead of running from them, stillness invites you to bring them before God. It's in those raw, honest moments that faith deepens. You discover that real faith isn't the absence of questions. It's the decision to trust God even when you don't have the answers. The still moments stretch your belief from shallow to steadfast. You begin to realize that God doesn't need to explain everything to prove He's faithful. He simply asks you to keep trusting. In the quiet, your dependence shifts. You move from relying on your strength to relying on His presence. The stillness becomes sacred ground where you stop doing and start being aware of Him, being anchored in His promises, being confident in His timing. Every time you choose peace over panic, your faith expands. Every time you choose to worship instead of worry, your roots grow deeper. Stillness becomes the soil where faith is refined, strengthened, and solidified. It's not that God withholds movement. It's that He's maturing your heart to carry what's coming next. Think of the process of growth in nature. A tree doesn't grow faster because there's noise around it. It grows in silence, in unseen spaces beneath the surface. The deeper the roots, the stronger the tree becomes when storms arrive. In the same way, your still seasons are not wasted. They are root seasons. While you wait, while you listen, while you remain still, faith digs deeper into the character of God. It learns stability in silence so it can stand tall in the storm. Growth doesn't happen when everything is visible. It happens when everything is still. Stillness also reveals how faith and peace are intertwined. You can't have one without the other. Faith is the confidence that God is working, and peace is the calm that comes from knowing He is. When you practice stillness, you begin to live from rest instead of reaction. You stop needing to prove anything or fix everything. You start to trust that what God promised, He will fulfill. That quiet confidence becomes your strength. Faith grows stronger not by effort, but by alignment, when your heart aligns with heaven's rhythm of rest and trust. It's in stillness that faith stops being theory and becomes reality. The verses you've quoted for years become alive in your spirit. Be still and know that I am God stops being a comforting phrase and becomes a daily practice. You discover that knowing God doesn't come through rushing, it comes through resting. In stillness, faith becomes less about what you can achieve and more about who you are becoming. Someone who trusts without needing to see, someone who waits without losing hope, someone who believes even when the world feels silent. Rest is one of the purest expressions of faith because it declares that God is in control even when you are not. In a world that glorifies business, rest feels unnatural. Everything around you tells you that your worth is measured by how much you can do, how hard you can work, how far you can push. But the kingdom of God operates differently. Faith doesn't strive to make things happen. It trusts that God already has. Rest becomes the visible evidence of invisible confidence. It's the heart posture that says, I don't have to make this work on my own because God already knows what he's doing. A rest is not laziness or apathy. It's spiritual alignment. It's stepping out of your own strength and stepping into his sufficiency. It's releasing control of the outcome and trusting the one who holds the outcome. When you choose to rest, you're choosing to believe that God's timing is better than your pressure. His process is wiser than your plan, and his pace is perfect even when it feels slow. The greatest battles of faith are not always fought with effort, but with surrender. You win not by pushing harder, but by leaning deeper into the one who never fails. Rest tests what you really believe about God's character. It's easy to say you trust him when everything is moving according to your timeline, but when he asks you to stop striving, to be still, to wait, that's when real faith is revealed. Rest is the pause between promise and fulfillment, the sacred space where faith takes root and grows quietly. It's in that pause that God proves himself faithful. You may not see the result immediately, but rest allows your spirit to breathe while God works behind the scenes. The unseen hand of heaven moves most powerfully when your hands are still. Rest is the rhythm of trust. It is the Sabbath of the soul, the place where striving ceases and grace begins to flow freely. When you rest, you are saying that God doesn't need your anxiety to accomplish his will. He's not waiting for you to panic before he moves. His strength is made perfect in your surrender. The moment you release your grip, you make room for him to act. God cannot fill what you refuse to let go of, and he cannot move where you are still trying to control. Rest gives him permission to take over completely. The ability to rest comes from the revelation of who God is. When you know his nature, you stop fearing his silence. When you know his goodness, you stop doubting his timing. True rest comes from relationship, not routine. It's not found in escaping life's pressures, but in inviting God into them. Even in the middle of chaos, you can rest if your heart knows that he is faithful. The storms around you may roar, but the peace within you remains unshaken. Rest is not the absence of trouble. It's the presence of trust. Rest exposes the illusion of control. It reminds you that you are not the source of your own provision, protection, or promotion. God is. When you rest, you're acknowledging that your future does not depend on how hard you work, but on how deeply you trust. The Israelites were commanded to rest on the seventh day, not because they were tired, but because God wanted them to remember that he was their provider. Every time you choose rest over worry, you are declaring that the same God who created the world in 6 days can handle your life without your constant intervention. In the quiet of rest, faith becomes real. It's where you stop talking about trust and start living it. Rest requires you to silence the noise of your own thoughts, the opinions of others, and the fear of what might happen next. It requires courage to step back and believe that God's hand is steady even when everything around you feels uncertain. The rest of faith is not passive. It's active surrender. It's worship through stillness, confidence through quietness, power through peace. Rest also renews your strength. When you stop striving, your heart becomes open again to hear God clearly. The exhaustion of doing gives way to the empowerment of being. The Spirit restores your soul, refreshes your purpose, and recalibrates your focus. In that renewal, you find that faith feels lighter because it's no longer something you're carrying alone. God never asked you to carry the weight of outcomes. He only asked you to trust him with them. Rest is not weakness, it's warfare. It's a declaration that the enemy's pressure has no power over your peace. When you rest, you strip the enemy of his ability to control you through fear and anxiety. You're saying, I refuse to be moved by what I see. I will be anchored in what God said. That's faith in its most powerful form, quiet, confident, and unshakable. Rest is not doing nothing. It's doing the most important thing, trusting completely. Waiting is one of the most difficult tests of faith because it feels like nothing is happening, yet it is often the place where God does his deepest work. When God asks you to wait, he is not denying you, he is developing you. Waiting is not wasted time in his kingdom, it's preparation time. It's the space between promise and fulfillment where character is forged, faith is refined, and perspective is transformed. In waiting, God shapes you for what he has already prepared. because he never gives a promise without also preparing a person to carry it. Every delay has a purpose. Every silence hides strategy. While you are waiting for the miracle is waiting for you to become ready to receive it. Waiting stretches your faith beyond convenience. It forces you to walk by trust, not by sight. It dismantles the illusion of control and brings you to the end of yourself so you can finally rely fully on him. Waiting teaches you to depend on God's timing rather than your own understanding. When you can't rush the process, you learn to rest in his sovereignty. You begin to realize that the hand of God is not slow, it is strategic. The waiting room of heaven is not empty. It's full of divine orchestration. While you think nothing is moving, heaven is setting things in motion that couldn't happen any other way. Every person God used powerfully went through a season of waiting. Joseph waited in the prison before the palace. David waited in the wilderness before the throne. Abraham waited decades for a promise that seemed impossible. Even Jesus waited 30 years before his ministry began. In each story, the waiting wasn't punishment, it was preparation. The promise was never in danger. The people were being strengthened to hold it. God's delays are not his denials. They are divine intervals designed to mature your faith and align your heart with his purpose. What feels like a pause is actually a process that's producing endurance, humility, and trust. Waiting also exposes what you truly believe. It reveals whether your faith is based on outcomes or on God himself. When answers are delayed, the heart is tested. Will you still worship when heaven seems silent? Will you still trust when nothing changes? Waiting purifies motives. It burns away the desire to simply get something from God and replaces it with a deeper longing to know him. The longer you wait, the more your heart learns to say, even if it doesn't happen my way, I still believe. That's mature faith, the kind that can't be shaken by delay because it's anchored in relationship, not results. In waiting, God rewires your perspective. What once felt like disappointment begins to look like divine direction. You start to see how every unanswered prayer, every closed door, every delay was actually protecting you. Sometimes God withholds what you want to give you what you truly need. The waiting season opens your spiritual eyes to see the difference between what's good and what's God. You stop asking, when will it happen? And start asking, what are you teaching me while I wait? That shift changes everything. Waiting becomes less about enduring time and more about embracing transformation. Waiting is also where miracles gain weight. Quick blessings rarely build strong believers. When you've waited, prayed, and cried, the miracle means more because it's been birthed through faith, not convenience. The process gives value to the promise. When it finally comes, you carry gratitude instead of entitlement. You realize that God wasn't just working on the miracle. He was working on you. And sometimes the greatest miracle isn't what you receive, but who you become while you're waiting for it. Patience is not passive, it's active trust. It's choosing to believe that God is good even when his timeline doesn't match your expectations. Waiting sharpens spiritual vision. You begin to notice small signs of his faithfulness along the way. A door that opens, a heart that softens, a moment of peace that reminds you he's near. Those small confirmations are evidence that the story is still unfolding. The miracle is not absent, it's maturing. It's being woven together in layers you cannot yet see. When you choose to wait well, you shift from anxiety to anticipation. You stop asking how long and start declaring any moment now. You begin to praise before the breakthrough because you trust the one who promised it. Waiting is the workshop of miracles because it is the place where heaven and earth align through patience and faith. God uses the waiting room to strengthen what impatience would destroy. Every second of waiting is working something within you that will make the miracle sustainable when it finally comes. Waiting builds depth, and depth is what gives miracles endurance. There is always divine purpose in delay. God never wastes time, he redeems it. While you wait, he is working in the unseen, arranging circumstances, preparing people, aligning opportunities. What looks like inactivity is often divine choreography. When the moment comes and the miracle manifests, you will see that every quiet day, every unanswered prayer, every tear and sigh was part of the masterpiece he was creating all along. Peace is not the absence of conflict. It is the presence of confidence that God is in control. When life feels uncertain, Peace becomes your greatest weapon. It's the atmosphere where faith can breathe and miracles can manifest. Many people try to fight their way into breakthrough through worry, striving, or control, but heaven's path always begins with peace. Before God releases a new season, he often stills your spirit. He calms the storm inside you before he calms the storm around you. Peace is not what follows the breakthrough. It is what invites it. When your heart is still, God can move freely. Peace is a declaration of trust. It says, I believe God is working even when I can't see it. It's a quiet confidence that refuses to be shaken by what the eyes observe. The enemy's greatest weapon is distraction, not destruction. He can't stop what God has planned, but he will do everything to pull you out of peace, because once you lose peace, you lose clarity. You stop hearing the gentle whisper of the Spirit and start reacting to noise. But when you guard your peace, you guard your position. Peace is the spiritual posture that keeps you in alignment with heaven's direction. It clears the fog of fear so you can see the path to breakthrough that was hidden in plain sight. Peace is not passive, it's powerful. It's an active decision to anchor yourself in God's promises rather than your problems. When Jesus stood in the boat and said, "Peace, be still," he wasn't just calming the sea, he was revealing a kingdom principle. Peace speaks to chaos with authority. The same peace that lived in him now lives in you, and it carries the same power to silence storms. When you carry peace into a situation, you bring heaven's government into earth's disorder. Peace becomes a shield around your mind and a guard over your heart. It protects you from reacting to fear, from rushing decisions, and from letting emotions lead where wisdom should guide. Breakthrough often comes in moments that feel ordinary. You might not hear thunder or see lightning, but when peace settles in, it's a sign that heaven is near. The stillness of peace is not inactivity, it's divine readiness. It's the assurance that you don't have to force open doors that God has already unlocked. When you live in peace, you stop chasing outcomes and start receiving them. You stop striving to make things happen and start trusting the one who makes all things new. Peace creates an atmosphere of faith, and faith is the key that opens every door to breakthrough. Peace is also the language of maturity. It says, I no longer need to see to believe. When you can rest in uncertainty, you've reached a level of faith that circumstances can't control. You're no longer moved by what you feel because you're anchored in what you know, that God is faithful. The peace of God surpasses understanding because it doesn't make sense to have calmness in chaos or joy in sorrow, yet that's exactly what faith produces. When you walk in that kind of peace, you become unshakable. The waves may rise, but your spirit stays steady. And it's in that steadiness that breakthrough begins to form. Peace is preparation. Before God multiplies, he brings order. Before he blesses, he brings stillness. The same God who created the universe did not speak until the Spirit hovered over the waters. That hovering was peace, divine stillness before divine creation. The same pattern happens in your life. Before the miracle, before the restoration, before the open door, God establishes peace in your heart. That peace becomes the foundation strong enough to hold the blessing. Without peace, even a miracle can feel unstable. But with peace, you can carry the weight of glory without fear. When you stop fighting for control and surrender to peace, you make space for God to move. He works best in hearts that are settled, not scattered. Peace turns panic into presence. It shifts your focus from the size of your problem to the greatness of your God. When you live from peace, your reactions change. You stop asking, what if, and start saying, you move from desperation to expectation. That inner calm tells heaven, I'm ready. Peace also accelerates breakthrough because it aligns you with divine timing. Anxiety rushes, but peace waits. Worry manipulates, but peace trusts. When you choose peace, you step out of striving and into flow. The blessings that seemed delayed begin to unfold because your spirit is now synchronized with God's rhythm. You no longer push against his timing, you walk in step with it. Peace prepares your heart to recognize opportunity when it comes, to discern divine appointments, and to move with clarity rather than confusion. Peace is not a feeling, it's a fortress. It's built by prayer, sustained by trust, and guarded by gratitude. When you nurture peace, you protect the atmosphere where miracles grow. Breakthrough doesn't come through panic, it comes through presence. When your heart is anchored in peace, heaven responds. The stillness of peace becomes the soil where God plants his next move. The silence of God can feel heavy, confusing, and even painful, yet it is often the place where his greatest work takes shape. When heaven seems quiet, our natural instinct is to assume that nothing is happening, but silence is not the language of absence. It is the sound of divine movement. God's silence is not inactivity, it is intentionality. He is working in ways that cannot be seen or measured by human understanding. Behind every quiet moment is a hidden current of purpose. God moves in silence because the deepest transformations happen away from public view. The same God who spoke creation into existence also knows when to remain silent so he can shape creation from within. When God seems silent, he is often working on layers of your life that words could not fix. He's not speaking to your situation because he's shaping your heart. Silence becomes the sacred workshop where motives are purified, desires are aligned, and dependence on him grows stronger. In the noise, you may seek answers, but in the silence, you find the answer himself. God hides his movement in quiet seasons so that faith can grow without evidence, so that you can trust without signs, and so that your worship becomes about who he is, not just what he does. There are times when silence is God's protection. If he revealed too much too soon, you might run ahead of his plan or try to control what only he can accomplish. His silence shields his strategy. He allows confusion to train your trust, uncertainty to build endurance, and waiting to teach you wisdom. Every silent season carries divine choreography. God is orchestrating details, shifting hearts, aligning moments, and preparing pathways that must mature before they can manifest. You may not hear his voice, but you can trust his fingerprints are on everything. In the silence, God also tests the roots of your faith. It's easy to believe when the voice of heaven is clear, but real faith is proven when you can't hear anything and still choose to stand firm. The silence reveals whether your relationship with God is built on emotion or on conviction. It exposes what you truly depend on. When the noise stops, you see what's real. Faith that survives silence becomes faith that sustains miracles. It matures from needing proof to resting in presence. God's silence refines you until your trust no longer wavers with the volume of his voice. Throughout Scripture, silence always preceded movement. Before creation, the earth was formless and void, and the Spirit of God hovered in stillness before the word was spoken. Between the Old and New Testaments, there were 400 years of silence before Christ came into the world. Heaven was not inactive in those centuries. It was preparing redemption. The silence was the sound of alignment, the breath before the breakthrough. The same is true in your life. The quiet seasons are not empty. They are pregnant with divine potential. The longer the silence, the greater the unveiling that follows. The silence of God invites you into deeper intimacy. When you stop hearing him externally, you start discovering him internally. His presence moves from the surface of your circumstances into the depths of your spirit. You begin to hear him not through noise, but through knowing. Silence trains your heart to listen beyond sound, to feel his movement in peace, to recognize his nearness in stillness. It's in those quiet moments when your dependence shifts from what he says to who he is. You start realizing that even when he's silent, he's still speaking through his peace, his word, his timing, and his faithfulness. Silence also reveals that God's movement is not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes his greatest miracles come softly, through a change of heart, a door that opens unexpectedly, a burden that suddenly lifts. God's power is often quiet because it doesn't need to prove itself. He doesn't need to announce his activity. His outcomes speak for themselves. The silence humbles you, teaching you to recognize his movement, not just in the spectacular, but in the subtle. Every breath of grace, every moment of peace, every unexpected strength in a hard day is proof that God is moving in ways your ears cannot hear, but your spirit can sense. When God is silent, he is often inviting you to move with him by faith. The silence pulls you closer, draws you deeper, and strengthens your discernment. It teaches you to walk not by explanations, but by revelation. The silence of God forms warriors who no longer need noise to stay confident, who no longer panic when heaven is quiet. You learn to interpret his stillness as strategy, not distance. You realize that silence is not a pause in his plan. It's part of it. It's the sacred rhythm between his promise and its fulfillment, the unseen movement that ensures everything will unfold exactly as it should. The silence of God is not empty space. It's full of divine activity. It's where angels move unseen, prayers rise like incense, and the next chapter of your life is being written in heaven's ink. While you wait, he works. While you rest, he rearranges. While you wonder, he weaves every detail together for your good. God's silence is never void. It is vibrant with motion, purpose, and preparation, shaping both you and your destiny in perfect harmony with his will. So today, relax, trust, and let God work in silence, because the same God who was faithful in your past is already preparing your future. And while you rest, heaven moves.